I'm Javier, 32 years old, and until last month, I thought my career as a financial advisor meant my family trusted me with money. That trust shattered when my father pointed his finger at me across our family kitchen. "Return the $55,000 or don't come back," he demanded while my sister nodded. "You took Mom's money." "We all know," she added with certainty. They never expected what happened when I placed those bank teller slips on the counter and watched their faces drain of color. If you're watching this right now, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear how I exposed a family secret that changed everything. Trust me, you'll want to stick around for this one. Growing up in Westfield, a middle-class neighborhood just outside of Indianapolis, my relationship with my parents was what most would consider ideal. My father, Martin, worked as a high school mathematics teacher, while my mother, Diana, ran a small flower shop downtown. We weren't wealthy by any means, but my parents always emphasized the importance of financial responsibility. From an early age, I showed an interest in numbers that made my father proud. While other kids collected baseball cards or video games, I maintained a small investment portfolio starting at age 14 with money from mowing lawns and shoveling snow. My parents encouraged this interest, with my father often sitting with me at the kitchen table, reviewing financial magazines and discussing the stock market. "You've got a gift, Javier," he would tell me. "Use it wisely, and you'll never have to worry about money like we do." My sister Melissa is 3 years older than me. As children, we were close, spending summers building elaborate forts in the backyard and defending them against imaginary invaders. As we grew older, though, the gap between us widened. While I pursued finance, Melissa jumped from interest to interest, never quite finding her footing. She studied art history in college, then switched to business, ultimately dropping out in her 3rd year to start what would become a string of failed entrepreneurial ventures. After graduating with my finance degree, I landed a position at Brookstone Financial Advisors, one of the most respected firms in Indianapolis. Within 5 years, I had built a reputation for conservative, thoughtful investment strategies that protected clients through market volatility. My personal clients included doctors, business owners, and even a few local celebrities. I took pride in safeguarding their financial futures. About 5 years ago, our family faced its first serious challenge when my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. The diagnosis came after months of unexplained fatigue, muscle weakness, and occasional vision problems that she had initially dismissed as simply getting older. The day we received the confirmation from her neurologist, Dr. Lawrence Phillips, remains vivid in my memory. My father broke down in tears in the hospital parking lot, something I had never seen before. "I don't know how we'll handle this, son," he admitted, his voice cracking. "The insurance will only cover so much." The financial implications of Mom's condition were significant. While her initial symptoms were manageable, Dr. Phillips warned us that MS is a progressive disease. We needed to prepare for increasing medical costs as time passed. Fortunately, my mother had maintained a separate savings account throughout her working life, building up approximately $200,000 for a rainy day, as she always said. It was 3 months after her diagnosis when my father approached me about managing this fund. We were sitting on their back porch, watching the sunset as Mom rested inside. "You understand this stuff better than anyone in the family," he said. "We need to make that money last as long as possible for your mother's treatments. Can you help us?" I was touched by his trust and immediately agreed. "I'll manage it conservatively," I promised. "Our priority is ensuring Mom has what she needs for the long haul." I set up a specialized investment account, focusing on low-risk, dividend-producing investments that would generate steady income while preserving the principal. I provided monthly reports to both my parents, explaining every transaction in terms they could understand. I even set up automatic bill payments for her regular medications and therapy sessions. The first signs of trouble appeared about a year later during a family dinner. Melissa questioned my involvement in Mom's finances while passing the mashed potatoes. "Isn't it a conflict of interest for you to manage Mom's money when you work for an investment firm?" she asked, her tone casual but eyes sharp. "I'm not charging any fees, Melissa," I explained, "and I'm keeping the investments extremely conservative. This isn't about growing wealth, it's about making sure Mom has what she needs." My father quickly changed the subject, but later that evening, I noticed him hurriedly tucking some financial papers into his desk drawer when I entered his home office to say goodbye. When I asked if everything was okay with their regular accounts, He smiled too quickly. "Everything's fine, son. Just some bills I need to sort through." I dismissed my concerns, trusting my family completely. After all, these were the people who had raised me with values of honesty and integrity. If I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? The first concrete sign that something was amiss came about 18 months after I began managing my mother's medical fund. While reviewing the monthly statements, I noticed several small withdrawals that I hadn't authorized. They weren't large amounts, typically between $200 and $500, but they appeared regularly enough to catch my attention. I brought it up with my father during our next family dinner, keeping my tone casual as we cleared the dishes together. "Dad, I noticed some withdrawals from Mom's medical account. Do you know anything about those?" He continued rinsing a plate, not meeting my eyes. "Oh, those? Just some additional treatments your mother wanted to try. Acupuncture and some herbal supplements. I meant to tell you." The explanation seemed reasonable enough, though I was surprised my mother hadn't mentioned these treatments during our weekly lunches. When I gently asked her about the acupuncture the following week, she looked momentarily confused before nodding. "Yes, it helps sometimes," she said vaguely, changing the subject to ask about my recent date with Alicia, a woman I'd been seeing. Over the next few months, my mother's condition worsened. Her fatigue deepened, and she began having more trouble with basic mobility. Dr. Phillips recommended increasing her physical therapy sessions from once to twice weekly and prescribed additional medication to manage her symptoms. The costs began to rise accordingly. Concerned about the long-term financial implications, I spent evenings researching additional insurance options and assistance programs that might help cover some expenses. There were several promising possibilities through national MS foundations, and I compiled a folder of information to share with my parents. My research was interrupted by an unexpected call from Dr. Phillips's office. His billing administrator was calling to inquire about several unpaid invoices totaling nearly $3,000. "There must be some mistake," I told her. "Those payments should be automated from the medical fund." After hanging up, I immediately logged into the account and discovered the automatic payments had been canceled 3 months earlier. Not by me. My stomach tightened as I also noticed the account balance was nearly $15,000 lower than my records indicated it should be. That evening, I drove straight to my parents' house, finding my father alone watching television while Mom rested upstairs. "Dad, why were the automatic payments to Dr. Phillips canceled?" I asked directly, showing him the account statement on my tablet. His face flushed as he muted the baseball game. "We've been having some financial difficulties, Javier. I needed to borrow a bit from Diana's fund temporarily. I was going to pay it back before you noticed. $15,000 isn't a bit." "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice down to avoid disturbing my mother. "What's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble?" After several minutes of pressing, my father finally admitted he'd developed a gambling habit, starting with occasional visits to the Riverboat Casino in Louisville and escalating to regular online poker games. He'd been using some of Mom's medical fund to cover his losses, convincing himself he could win it all back with one good streak. "I know it was wrong," he said, tears in his eyes. "I just got in over my head. But I swear I'll stop now. Your mother can never know about this, Javier. It would break her heart." I was stunned by the confession but agreed not to tell Mom, believing this was truly a temporary lapse in judgment. My father promised to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings and gave me his word he would never touch the medical fund again. I transferred the account to a new bank and removed his access, explaining to my mother that this was simply for better interest rates. Despite these precautions, the family tension continued to build. At a Sunday dinner the following month, Melissa openly questioned my investment decisions in front of everyone. "Mom's account should be performing better in this market," she stated confidently despite her limited financial knowledge. "A friend of mine made 20% returns last year with her advisor. We're prioritizing security over growth," I explained patiently. "High returns come with high risk, and that's not appropriate for Mom's medical fund." My father remained suspiciously quiet during this exchange, studying his plate instead of backing me up. Later that evening, while helping Mom with her medication, I discovered a credit card statement on their bedroom dresser showing multiple cash advances at Louisville Casino totaling over $6,000 from the previous month. My father's promises had been empty. I confronted him in his garage workshop where he retreated after dinner. "You promised you'd stop gambling," I said, showing him the statement. His shoulders slumped. "I'm trying, Javier. It's harder than I thought. but I haven't touched Diana's medical money again. I swear on my life. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, this was my father, the man who had taught me about integrity and responsibility. He looked so genuinely remorseful that I decided to give him one more chance. "I'm going to check all the accounts more frequently now," I warned him. "And if I find you've taken money from Mom's fund again, I'll have to tell her everything." He nodded solemnly. "It won't come to that. Family comes first. Always." I left that night feeling uneasy, but hopeful that my father would keep his word this time. To ensure additional protection, I set up daily balance alerts on all accounts and began reviewing transactions weekly rather than monthly. I still trusted my father, but now that trust came with verification. 6 months passed with relative calm. My mother's condition stabilized somewhat with her new medication regimen, though she now required a cane for even short walks around the house. I continued managing her medical fund, and the daily balance alerts showed no unexpected activity. My father seemed to be keeping his promise, even showing me his 90-day chip from Gamblers Anonymous during a private moment at a family barbecue. "I'm back on track, son," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "Thanks for not giving up on me." Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. My phone buzzed during a client meeting with an alert from my mother's primary medical account. Balance below threshold. $145,278. This was approximately $55,000 less than it should have been. I excused myself from the meeting and immediately called the bank, only to discover a series of withdrawals had been made over the previous 3 weeks. Each withdrawal was just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, totaling exactly $55,000. The withdrawals had been authorized using the security questions and account password. My hands shook as I ended the call. Only 3 people knew those security answers: myself, my mother, and my father. Given my mother's declining cognitive function, I doubted she could have navigated the complex withdrawal process, which left only one possibility. Rather than confronting my father immediately, I decided to investigate further. I tracked the transfers to an account at First National Bank that I didn't recognize. When I contacted them, they refused to provide information about the account holder without a subpoena, citing privacy regulations. That evening, I visited my parents under the pretense of bringing dinner. My mother seemed particularly tired, barely touching her food before excusing herself to rest. Once she left the room, I asked my father directly about the missing money. $55,000 has disappeared from Mom's medical account. Do you know anything about that? The change in his demeanor was immediate and alarming. Instead of showing guilt as he had before, his face hardened with defensive anger. "Are you accusing me of something, Javier, after everything I've done for this family?" "I'm just asking a simple question, Dad. The money is missing, and I need to know where it went." "Maybe you should be looking at your own management," he snapped. "You're the financial expert who's been controlling everything. For all we know, you could have been skimming from the account all along." His accusation left me speechless. Before I could recover, he stormed out of the kitchen, ending the conversation. The following day, I tried speaking with my mother alone about the financial situation, hoping she might have some insight. We sat in her garden, a place that still gave her joy despite her limited mobility. "Mom, I need to ask you about your medical fund. Did Dad discuss making any large withdrawals with you recently?" She looked momentarily confused, an expression that had become more common as her condition progressed. "I don't think so, sweetheart. Martin handles the day-to-day bills now that I'm not well. I trust him completely, just as I trust you." Her unquestioning faith made what happened next even more painful. Later that week, Melissa unexpectedly showed up at my office, something that had never happened before. "We need to talk about Mom's money," she said without preamble, sitting down across from my desk. "I've been trying to figure out where the money went," I began, relieved that someone else in the family seemed concerned. She cut me off. "Dad told me everything, Javier. He thinks you've been moving money around to hide the fact that you've lost a big chunk of Mom's medical fund on risky investments." "What? That's absolutely not true," I protested, shocked by the allegation. "Then how do you explain the missing $55,000? She asked. Her eyes narrowed. "Dad's been tracking the statements too, you know. He's devastated that you would betray Mom's trust like this." It was becoming clear that my father had shifted from defensive to offensive, crafting a narrative that painted me as the villain. Even more shocking was that Melissa, who had always been skeptical of our father's financial responsibility, was now firmly in his corner. The situation reached a breaking point at my mother's birthday dinner the following weekend. What should have been a celebration instead became an exercise in tension and unspoken accusations. Throughout the evening, I noticed my father and Melissa exchanging glances whenever I spoke. Even my Aunt Patricia and Uncle George, who had driven in from Cincinnati for the occasion, seemed unusually cold toward me. During dessert, my mother mentioned needing to schedule her next round of experimental treatments, and my father quickly changed the subject. Later, when I tried to ask her about these treatments, Aunt Patricia pulled me aside. "Your father told us what's been going on," she whispered. "I never thought you, of all people, would take advantage of your mother's illness. The family is very disappointed, Javier." I was being systematically isolated, with my father apparently spreading his false narrative to extended family members. The betrayal cut deeply, especially knowing that my mother's care might be at risk. The following week, I scheduled a private meeting with Dr. Phillips, ostensibly to discuss new treatment options. Once in his office, I asked about the experimental treatments my mother had mentioned. The doctor looked confused. "We discussed several experimental options 3 months ago, but your father informed me the family had decided against pursuing them due to cost concerns." Cost concerns? Those treatments were fully covered by the medical fund. Dr. Phillips sighed, removing his glasses. "Javier, I've known your family for years, so I'll speak frankly. Your father told me there were financial issues with your mother's accounts, and that certain treatment options were no longer viable. He mentioned something about investment losses. The depth of my father's deception was becoming clearer. Not only had he taken the money, but he was actively interfering with my mother's medical care while blaming me for financial mismanagement. As I left Dr. Phillips' office, I felt something shift inside me. The trust I had placed in my father was irrevocably broken, and I knew I needed to uncover the full truth, whatever the cost. 3 days after my meeting with Dr. Phillips, my cell phone rang at 6 in the morning. My father's name flashed on the screen, unusual for someone who typically didn't start his day until 7:30. "Javier, we need to have a family meeting tonight," he said without greeting, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Everyone will be there at 7. This situation with your mother's money needs to be resolved immediately." "Dad, I've been trying to figure out—" 7 o'clock, Javier. Don't be late." He hung up before I could respond. The abruptness of the call and the planned presence of everyone made it clear this wasn't going to be a reasonable discussion. This was going to be an ambush. I called my office and cleared my schedule for the day, then began gathering bank records, transaction histories, and account statements. If I was walking into a trap, I would at least be armed with facts. I spent hours organizing documentation, creating a clear timeline of withdrawals, and noting which ones I had authorized versus those that had occurred without my knowledge. I also printed the security logs showing when and from where the account had been accessed. By late afternoon, I had compiled a comprehensive record of the missing $55,000 and evidence suggesting my father's involvement. As I pulled into my parents' driveway that evening, my stomach tightened at the number of cars parked outside. This wasn't just my immediate family. My father had gathered an audience. I recognized the vehicles belonging to Aunt Patricia and Uncle George, my father's brother Thomas, and even my grandmother's ancient Buick. My sister's red convertible was positioned prominently near the front door, as if announcing her central role in whatever was about to unfold. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my folder of documents and walked to the front door. Before I could knock, it swung open to reveal Melissa's husband Ryan, his expression uncomfortably sympathetic. "Everyone's in the living room," he said quietly. "It's pretty tense in there, man." The conversation stopped abruptly as I entered. 9 family members sat arranged almost theatrically around the room, with my father standing by the fireplace, as if positioned to deliver a speech. My mother occupied her medical recliner in the corner, looking pale and confused. Melissa sat perched on the armrest next to her, one hand protectively on our mother's shoulder. "You're late," my father said, though my watch showed exactly 7 o'clock. "I'm right on time," I replied calmly, choosing to remain standing rather than taking the conspicuously empty seat that had been placed in the center of the room. "What's this about, Dad?" He clasped his hands behind his back in a posture reminiscent of his classroom stance. "We're here because this family has a serious problem that needs to be addressed." Your mother's medical fund has been compromised, and we need to know where the money has gone." Before I could respond, he continued, his voice rising. $55,000 is missing, Javier. Money your mother needs for her treatments. Money you were entrusted to manage. I've been trying to track down those funds for weeks, I said, keeping my voice level. If you'd return my calls. "Stop lying!" My father's shout startled everyone. He strode toward me, pointing his finger directly at my face. "Return the $55,000 or don't come home again. This family has had enough of your deception." The room fell silent, the ultimatum hanging in the air between us. Before I could formulate a response, Melissa stood up. "You took Mom's money," she said with cold certainty. "We all know it." "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused by her confidence. Melissa walked to the coffee table and picked up a manila envelope, removing several papers. "Your new car," she began, holding up a photo of me beside my recently purchased sedan. "Your luxury apartment downtown," she continued, showing a printed Zillow listing of my building. "The vacation to Cancun last month," she added, displaying a social media photo I'd posted with Alicia. "All these expenses right when Mom's money goes missing? That's not a coincidence, Javier." "My car is 3 years old and fully paid for," I countered. "My apartment is the same one I've had for 5 years, and that Cancun trip was paid for by Alicia's parents as a gift." "Then where's the money?" my father demanded. "You were the only one with full access to those accounts." My mother began to cry softly, the sound cutting through the heated exchange. "Javier, how could you?" she whispered. "We trusted you." The pain in her voice nearly broke me. I looked around the room at the faces of my extended family, seeing judgment and disappointment reflected back at me. None of them were asking for my side of the story. They had already convicted me based on my father's narrative. Uncle Thomas shook his head slowly. "I always thought you were the responsible one, Javier." Aunt Patricia wouldn't even meet my eyes, while grandmother stared at me with an expression of profound disappointment that made me feel 8 years old again. My father crossed his arms, a gesture of finality. "You have 1 week to return the money, Javier, every cent of it. Until then, you're not welcome in this house or at any family events." The injustice of the situation threatened to overwhelm me. I had spent years protecting my mother's finances, only to be accused of the very betrayal my father had committed. For a moment, I considered laying out the evidence I'd brought, exposing him in front of everyone. But looking at my mother's fragile state, I knew that a public confrontation would only cause her more pain. "I'll find the truth," I said quietly, looking directly at my father. "And when I do, I'll be back." I turned and walked out without another word, the weight of my family's misplaced judgment pressing down on me. As I started my car, I caught a glimpse of Melissa watching from the window, her expression unreadable. Whatever game she and my father were playing, they had no idea what was coming next. The morning after the family confrontation, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The shock and hurt had crystallized into determination. If my father wanted to play this game, I would make sure he understood exactly who he was playing against. As a financial advisor, I had resources and knowledge that he had clearly underestimated. My first step was calling Angela, a colleague at my firm who specialized in fraud investigation. While I couldn't officially involve my company in a personal matter, Angela had become a good friend over the years and agreed to meet me for unofficial consultation over coffee. "So your father's accusing you of stealing money that you think he actually took?" she clarified after I explained the situation. "And he's convinced your entire family you're the bad guy?" "That's the short version," I confirmed. Angela's expression hardened. "Then we need to follow the money trail. Financial fraud leaves fingerprints, even when someone thinks they've been careful." She helped me draft formal requests for the bank to provide detailed transaction records, including times, locations, and any available video footage from branch visits. While the process would normally take weeks, Angela's professional relationship with the regional bank manager expedited our request. 2 days later, I received an encrypted email with the complete transaction history for my mother's accounts. The withdrawals had indeed been carefully structured, each falling just below reporting thresholds. But critically, they hadn't been conducted online as I had initially assumed. They were in-person withdrawals at 3 different bank branches, requiring physical presence and ID verification. "This is our smoking gun," Angela said when I shared the findings. "In-person withdrawals mean we can request the security footage. The bank's cooperation continued thanks to the severity of the potential fraud and Angela's persuasive skills. By Friday afternoon, I was sitting in a small room at the main branch, watching security footage with the bank's fraud prevention officer, Marcus. The first video showed a crystal-clear image of my father approaching the teller window, sliding over an ID and withdrawal slip. The timestamp matched perfectly with the first major withdrawal. The second and third videos showed the same pattern at different branches, my father carefully keeping his transactions under the reporting threshold at each location. "Is that sufficient evidence?" I asked Marcus after we reviewed all the footage. "More than sufficient," he confirmed. "These are clearly not authorized transactions if you're the account manager and didn't approve them. The withdrawal slips should have your signature, not his. Can I get copies of those slips?" "Absolutely. We'll need them for our records anyway, and you should have them for yours." The withdrawal slips revealed the final piece of the puzzle. My father had forged my signature on each one, a clumsy imitation that nevertheless had fooled the tellers who processed the transactions. With this evidence in hand, I turned my attention to discovering where the money had gone. The transfers had led to an account at First National Bank, but I still didn't know who controlled that account. For this, I needed additional help. Larry Thompson had been my first client when I started at Brookstone Financial. A retired detective turned private investigator, Larry specialized in financial cases and owed me for the retirement portfolio that had outperformed his expectations for 5 consecutive years. "I need to know who owns this account," I told him, sliding the account number across the table at our meeting. Larry didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Give me 48 hours. True to his word, Larry called me 2 days later. The account belongs to Silver State Holdings, LLC, a company registered in Nevada 3 months ago. The sole officer listed is Melissa Ramirez, my sister. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me given her alliance with my father, but the confirmation still felt like a punch to the gut. "Can you find out what the money was used for?" I asked. "Already did. There were 2 major outflows from that account. $30,000 went to Louisville River Casino to settle an outstanding marker in your father's name. The remaining $25,000 was transferred to Blossom Beauty Boutique, LLC, which appears to be your sister's latest business venture." The picture was becoming crystal clear. My father's gambling debts had spiraled further than I realized, and he had roped Melissa into his scheme with the promise of funding for her new business. Together, they had stolen from my mother's medical fund and then constructed an elaborate lie to blame me when the missing funds inevitably came to light. But there was one question still unanswered. How had they gained access to accounts I had secured after my father's previous misappropriation? The answer came from an unexpected source. The following day, I received a call from Tracy, my mother's part-time caregiver, who visited 3 times weekly. "Javier, I'm not sure if I should be telling you this," she began hesitantly, "but something doesn't feel right. Your father asked me to help your mother sign some papers last month because her hands were too shaky. When I asked what they were, he said they were just updated medical forms, but I glimpsed something about bank authorizations. Did my mother understand what she was signing?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. Honestly, no. It was one of her bad days, cognitively. She was having trouble focusing and just signed where your father pointed. I should have said something then, but it wasn't my place to question. "You're doing the right thing by telling me now, Tracy. Thank you." The final piece clicked into place. My father had exploited my mother's diminishing cognitive capacity to obtain her signatures on documents, granting him access to the accounts I had secured. It was a particularly cruel form of elder abuse disguised as familial care. With all the evidence compiled, I created a comprehensive report documenting every aspect of the fraud: the forged signatures, the security footage, the money trail to my sister's business, the casino payments, and Tracy's testimony about the coerced signatures. I made 3 copies, placing them in professional binders with tabbed sections for easy reference. As I finished the last binder, my phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Patricia. "Family dinner tomorrow at your parents'. Your father says it's your last chance to make things right." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. I would indeed make things right, though not in the way my father anticipated. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a sense of calm determination. The truth was fully documented and irrefutable. Now it was time to present it to the family that had so quickly turned against me. Saturday evening arrived with an unusual stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what was about to unfold. I dressed carefully in a charcoal suit that projected both professionalism and sobriety, appropriate for the gravity of the occasion. The evidence binders were stacked neatly in my briefcase, each page ready to shatter the elaborate deception my father and sister had constructed. I hadn't been invited to the dinner, precisely speaking. Aunt Patricia's text had conveyed my father's ultimatum rather than a genuine invitation. But this technical distinction wouldn't stop me from arriving exactly when the family would be gathered around the dinner table, the perfect captive audience for the truth. The drive to my parents' house felt both endless and too brief. I rehearsed what I would say, how I would remain calm even when faced with initial hostility. My mother's well-being remained my primary concern. The revelation would hurt her deeply, but the alternative, allowing my father to continue draining her medical fund while receiving inadequate treatment, was worse. I parked a block away and walked the remaining distance, the evening air cool against my face. Through the dining room windows, I could see them all gathered exactly as I'd anticipated. My father at the head of the table, Melissa at his right hand, my mother looking frail but present. The extended family filled the remaining seats, plates full of what appeared to be my mother's traditional Saturday pot roast. Rather than knocking, I used my key to enter quietly through the side door. No one noticed my presence until I stepped into the archway between the kitchen and dining room. "Javier," my mother's surprised voice cut through the dinner conversation. "What are you doing here?" All heads turned toward me. My father's face flushed with immediate anger. "You weren't invited," he said coldly, "unless you've brought the money you stole." "I've brought something better," I replied, my voice steady as I placed my briefcase on the nearby sideboard. "The truth." "We already know the truth," Melissa interjected. "You took Mom's money, and now you're trying to talk your way out of it." The family murmured in agreement, their faces showing varying degrees of disappointment and anger directed at me. Only my grandmother remained silent, her eyes moving thoughtfully between my face and my father's. "Before anyone says anything else," I continued, "I want to show you something." I removed the bank teller slips from my briefcase and placed them on the counter separating the kitchen from the dining room. Then I added the security camera photos, showing my father at each bank branch, the timeline of withdrawals, and finally, the documents tracing the money to the casino and Melissa's business. $55,000 was indeed stolen from Mom's medical fund, I said calmly. But not by me. The color drained from my father's face as he recognized the evidence before him. Melissa stared at the security photos, her confident expression crumbling. "Martin?" My mother's voice was small but clear. "What is Javier talking about?" My father stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is ridiculous. Javier has clearly falsified these documents to cover his tracks." "The bank's fraud department disagrees," I countered, removing the official bank report from my briefcase. "As does the casino, where $30,000 of Mom's money went to pay off your gambling debts." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Aunt Patricia was the first to react, reaching for the bank statements with trembling hands. "These are real bank documents," she confirmed, her professional experience as a paralegal lending weight to her assessment. "And that's definitely your signature, Martin." "It's not what it looks like," my father insisted, though his voice had lost its earlier conviction. "And what about the $25,000 that went to Blossom Beauty Boutique?" I asked, turning to Melissa. "Your new business venture that mysteriously secured funding right when Mom's money disappeared." Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "Dad said he was lending me startup money from his retirement account," she whispered. "I didn't know it was from Mom's medical fund." "That's a lie," my father shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "Melissa knew exactly where the money came from. This was her idea in the first place." The unity between them fractured instantly. Melissa rose from her chair, backing away from our father. "Don't you dare blame this on me. You came to me saying you needed help moving some money temporarily. You said Mom's treatments were covered by insurance now, and we could use some of the fund for other things." "You ungrateful little." My father lunged toward Melissa but was restrained by Uncle Thomas. "Enough." My mother's voice cut through the chaos with unexpected strength. She was fully upright in her chair now, one hand gripping her cane so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "Javier, explain everything. From the beginning." For the next 20 minutes, I methodically walked the family through what had happened. My father's initial gambling problem that I had discovered and kept quiet, his promises to stop, the escalation to stealing from my mother's medical fund, and finally the elaborate conspiracy to frame me when the missing money became impossible to hide. The most disturbing part, I concluded, looking directly at my mother, is that some of your treatments were canceled not because of financial concerns, but because Dad told Dr. Phillips the family had decided against them. Treatments that could have helped manage your symptoms better. My mother's face reflected a complex mixture of emotions: betrayal, heartbreak, and beneath it all, a steely resolve I hadn't seen since before her diagnosis. "Is this true, Martin?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. My father's defiance crumbled under her gaze. "I was going to replace the money," he mumbled. "I just needed some time." "With what?" Uncle Thomas demanded. "More gambling?" "I had a system," my father insisted weakly. "It was starting to work." "And dragging Melissa into this? Turning the entire family against Javier? Was that part of your system too?" My grandmother's voice, rarely raised, cut through his excuses like a knife. The family's focus shifted from me to my father and sister as the full extent of their deception became clear. Aunt Patricia moved to sit beside my mother, putting a protective arm around her shoulders. Uncle George began asking pointed questions about which treatments had been canceled and how to reinstate them immediately. My sister, seeing the tide of family opinion turning decisively against her, attempted damage control. "I didn't know how bad it was," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Dad told me Javier had been making risky investments with Mom's money and we needed to protect what was left. I believed him, yet you accepted $25,000 for your business without questioning where it came from," I asked quietly. After specifically questioning my management of Mom's accounts for years, she had no answer, her gaze dropping to the floor. My father made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Diana, you have to understand. The pressure of your illness, the constant worry about money, it affected my judgment. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I never meant for it to go this far." My mother studied him silently for a long moment before turning to me. "Javier, what happens now?" "That depends on what you want to do, Mom," I replied. "There's enough evidence here for criminal charges of fraud, elder abuse, and theft. Or we can handle this within the family, with strict conditions." She nodded slowly, the weight of the decision evident in her expression. "I need some time to think. But right now, I want Martin and Melissa to leave this house." "Diana, be reasonable," my father began. "I am being extremely reasonable," she interrupted, her voice finding its strength again. "Considering what you've done, asking you to leave rather than calling the police immediately is the definition of reasonable." Uncle Thomas and Uncle George stood simultaneously, making it clear they would enforce my mother's wishes if necessary. My father looked around the table, finding no allies among the family that had so recently supported his narrative against me. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and wallet from the sideboard and walked out. Melissa lingered, her expression pleading. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't understand what was really happening." "We'll talk another time, Melissa," my mother replied, her tone gentler but still firm. "Right now, I need space from both of you." After they left, the atmosphere in the dining room shifted. Family members approached me one by one, offering apologies for believing the worst about me. Their words were sincere but couldn't erase the pain of having been so quickly judged and condemned by the people who should have known me best. As the evening wound down, I sat alone with my mother in the kitchen, both of us cradling cups of tea that had long gone cold. "I should have seen it," she said finally. "The signs were all there. Dad went to extraordinary lengths to hide this from everyone, Mom, and he exploited your illness to do it." She reached across the table to take my hand. "But you didn't give up. Even when the entire family turned against you, you fought for the truth, and for me." In that moment, amidst the wreckage of trust and the uncertain future ahead, I felt a thread of something positive emerging. The bonds that had been broken might eventually be repaired, though they would never be the same. And most importantly, my mother would now receive the care she truly needed, protected by those who genuinely had her best interests at heart. The weeks following the revelation unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of consequences and rebuilding. My father moved into a small apartment across town, his departure from the family home marked by a subdued loading of suitcases rather than the dramatic exit he might have imagined. He left behind 30 years of marriage and a family irreversibly changed by his actions. My first priority was restoring my mother's medical care. I scheduled an immediate appointment with Dr. Phillips to review her treatment plan and reinstate the options that had been canceled due to my father's interference. The doctor was professionally reserved but couldn't hide his relief at seeing proper attention returned to my mother's care. "These treatments won't reverse the progression that's already occurred," he explained gently, "but they can significantly improve her quality of life moving forward and slow future degeneration." The financial damage required more complex solutions. I hired an attorney specializing in elder financial abuse to help create a structured recovery plan. Rather than pursuing criminal charges, which my mother wanted to avoid, we established a binding agreement requiring my father to repay the stolen funds through a combination of retirement account liquidation and monthly payments from his teaching salary. "He'll live very modestly for the next 7 years," the attorney noted after finalizing the terms, "but it's certainly preferable to prison." Melissa's situation proved more complicated. The $25,000 she had received was invested in inventory and equipment for her boutique, making immediate repayment impossible. After several tense conversations, we agreed she would repay the amount through a percentage of her business profits and by providing weekly assistance with my mother's care. Her first day back at the house was awkward, the weight of betrayal hanging heavily between her and our mother. I observed from the kitchen as Melissa hesitantly helped with lunch preparation, their conversation stilted and formal. "It's going to take time," my mother said later when we were alone. "But she's still my daughter." My mother's capacity for forgiveness astounded me, though I noticed she tempered it with new boundaries. Financial discussions were now off-limits with both my father and Melissa. All decisions about her medical fund went through me exclusively, with oversight from Aunt Patricia as an additional safeguard. The extended family's response evolved over time. Initial shock and anger toward my father and sister gradually softened into a complicated mixture of disappointment and cautious reconciliation. Sunday dinners resumed after a 1-month hiatus, though with a noticeably different energy. My father was invited but seated away from the head of the table, a visual representation of his diminished standing. Melissa attended with her husband, quieter than before, working slowly to rebuild trust through consistent actions rather than words. My own healing process followed a different timeline. While I maintained cordial relationships with my father and sister in my mother's presence, I struggled to forgive the calculated way they had turned the family against me. The memory of standing alone in that living room, unjustly accused and summarily condemned, revisited me in quiet moments. "You have every right to your anger," my grandmother told me during one of our newly established weekly lunch dates. "But don't let it consume you. That only gives them continued power over your happiness." Her wisdom, as always, penetrated the armor I had constructed around my heart. I began seeing a therapist to process the complex emotions of family betrayal, gradually finding ways to release the anger while maintaining healthy boundaries. 3 months after the confrontation, I established a formal trust for my mother's medical care with proper legal protections. The remaining funds, supplemented by my father's repayments and contributions from other family members, were placed under professional management with transparent reporting and multiple authorization requirements for withdrawals. No single person, including me, could access the funds without oversight. "This is how it should have been from the beginning," I explained during the family meeting where I introduced the new arrangement. "We all love Mom, but love needs to be supported by proper safeguards when significant assets are involved." The experience transformed my professional approach as well. At Brookstone Financial, I developed a specialized service for families managing medical funds for vulnerable members, incorporating the hard lessons I'd learned through personal experience. My first seminar on protecting elderly family members from financial exploitation was attended by over 70 people, many sharing stories with disturbing similarities to my own. My mother's health stabilized with her renewed treatment regimen. Though she still required a wheelchair for longer outings, her energy improved and the cognitive fluctuations decreased in frequency. We celebrated small victories: her completion of a complex jigsaw puzzle, her return to tending the smaller pots in her garden with adaptive tools, her ability to join a weekly support group for MS patients. My relationship with my father evolved into something I never anticipated, a cautious, formal connection maintained primarily for my mother's benefit. He attended his Gamblers Anonymous meetings faithfully and secured a therapist who specialized in addiction. At the 6-month mark, he presented me with his recertification as a mathematics teacher, having completed the continuing education requirements he'd been neglecting during his gambling spiral. "I know it doesn't fix what I did," he said, his eyes meeting mine directly for the first time in months. "Nothing can, but I'm trying to rebuild something worth salvaging." I nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting his implicit request for forgiveness. Time would reveal whether his changes were lasting or merely another performance. Melissa's journey toward redemption took a different path. Her boutique struggled initially but found stable footing after she partnered with a local women's shelter, providing job training for residents. The business model shift seemed to awaken something authentic in her that had been missing in her previous ventures. During one of her afternoons helping our mother, I overheard a conversation that suggested genuine growth. "I spent so many years chasing quick success," she told Mom while organizing medications. "I was jealous of Javier's stability and achievement. It was easier to resent him than to admit I was making poor choices." My mother's response was gentle but direct. "Understanding why we do wrong doesn't excuse the wrong itself, but it can help us avoid repeating it." As my mother's first post-diagnosis year anniversary approached, I organized a small celebration at her favorite restaurant. The gathering included only those who had stood by her most faithfully through the crisis: Aunt Patricia, Uncle George, my grandmother, and myself. My father and Melissa were invited to join for dessert afterward, a compromise that acknowledged their ongoing connection without pretending the past year hadn't happened. During the meal, my mother surprised us all by raising her glass in a toast. "To painful truths," she said, her voice clear and steady. "They hurt terribly in the moment, but they free us from living lies." Later that evening, as I helped her from the car to the front porch of what was now solely her home, she paused to look at the night sky. "You know what I've learned through all this, Javier?" she asked. "Trust should never be blind, even with family. Perhaps especially with family. Love without accountability isn't really love at all." Her words crystallized the core lesson of the past year better than anything I could have articulated. True love includes honesty, boundaries, and sometimes difficult confrontations. It demands courage to stand alone for truth when necessary, even against those we love most. I've carried that wisdom forward, applying it in all my relationships. The experience transformed me from someone who trusted too easily into someone who understands that authentic trust must be built on demonstrated integrity, not merely familial obligation or shared history. The family continues to heal, differently shaped but gradually finding a new equilibrium. My father makes his payments faithfully. Melissa's business has become sustainably profitable. My mother's condition remains stable with appropriate care. And I have found a deeper purpose in helping other families navigate the complex intersection of money, illness, and trust. Standing for truth cost me dearly in the short term, but it ultimately freed all of us from a web of deception that would have only grown more destructive with time. Sometimes the hardest path is the one that leads to genuine healing, even when it requires giving those we love a reason to truly mean their ultimatums. If you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you, I hope my story offers some comfort and perspective. The road to rebuilding trust is long and never perfect, but it begins with courage to face uncomfortable truths. Have you ever had to stand alone for what's right, even when everyone doubted you? Share your experience in the comments below. And if you found value in my story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that standing for truth, however painful, is always worthwhile in the end. Thank you for listening to my journey.